The wind howled across the walls of Riverrun, carrying the sharp bite of winter and the faint stench of smoke from distant camps. Robb Stark stood alone in the war tent, his back to the fire, staring at a map stained with blood and wine. His eyes, heavy with decisions, locked onto a carved wooden direwolf placed over the riverlands. So much had changed, too much. Robb had already broken a vow. He had married Talisa out of love, not duty. That alone had cost him the phrase, a powerful house with a crucial bridge now seething with betrayal. His army had shrunk. Allies were wavering. The Lannisters grew bolder with every passing day. But Robb was still the king in the north. He would not kneel. And now there was only one real chance left. Dorne. The Martells had the soldiers, the heat, and a deep-rooted hatred for the Lannisters. They had never forgiven what was done to Elia Martell during the sack of King's Landing, when Gregor Clegane, the Mountain, killed her and her children in the name of House Lannister. If Robb could get Dorne on his side, it would change the war. He stepped back from the map and looked at Lord Edmure Tully, his uncle, who had just entered the tent. "I want to send a raven to Sunspear," Robb said firmly. "To Prince Doran Martell." Edmure frowned. "Dorne, that far south?" "They hate the Lannisters as much as we do," Robb said. "We offer them justice, vengeance, and alliance. With their help we push south, take King's Landing from two sides, north and south." Edmure hesitated. "You think they'll respond?" Robb narrowed his eyes. "I don't need them to respond. I need them to act." The letter was written before midnight. It was short, respectful, and powerful. Robb offered alliance, marriage, and vengeance. He signed it with the seal of the king in the north and sent it with his most trusted raven handler, a boy named Aaron, who had grown up in Winterfell with Bran and Rickon. The raven took off before dawn, flying south through cold skies. No one knew then that it would never reach Sunspear, that something or someone else would stop it. Far away, in a dark chamber under Harrenhal, a pair of yellow eyes watched flames dance across a bowl of blood. Melisandre, the Red Woman, whispered to the fire, her voice low and sharp. "The wolf seeks the sun," she said, "but the shadow eats the sky." Beside her, Lord Roose Bolton observed silently. He had already grown wary of Robb Stark. Too many victories had made the boy arrogant. The northern bannermen whispered. The king in the north was losing favor. "Will the raven reach its mark?" Rose asked. "No," Melisandre replied. "The flames show wings burning. The message will die in the air." Rose nodded slowly. "Good, let him bleed alone." As days passed, Robb waited. He counted each hour as if it were a battle lost. He sent scouts to watch for Dornish movement. He kept his council informed, but only Talisa knew the truth, how much he had pinned his hopes on that raven. "Do you think they'll answer?" she asked him one cold night as they lay in bed. "They have to," he said. "We don't win this war without them." Talisa touched his face gently. "Then they'll come." But they didn't. Weeks passed. No raven returned, no answer, no movement from the Martells. It was as if Dorne hadn't received the message at all. And in truth, they hadn't. Far from Riverrun, the raven's broken body lay in the wilds near the Stormlands, its wings torn, message gone. The blood-smeared parchment had been taken by a man dressed in black, whose face was hidden behind a hood stitched with a red sun, a sun that never rose. In the dungeons of Casterly Rock, Varys stood with his hands behind his back, looking down at the raven's stolen message. Tywin Lannister sat in the shadows, reading it slowly, his eyes narrowing. "So the boy thinks Dorne will save him," Tywin muttered. Varys remained silent. Tywin crushed the parchment in his hand and tossed it into the flames. "Let him hope," he said coldly. "The North dies alone." Snowflakes drifted lazily through the air, melting on the shoulders of Robb Stark as he stepped out from the war tent. The early morning mist blanketed the camp, hiding the exhaustion that clung to every man. Winter was creeping in faster now, and with it hunger and doubt. His men whispered behind his back. The boy king who lost the phrase, the wolf who married for love. Some still followed him out of loyalty. Others, because they feared what came if they didn't. Robb wasn't blind to it. He just couldn't afford to show it. He walked through the rows of tents, greeting wounded men, nodding to sentries, and helping a boy lift a bucket of feed for the horses. He still remembered every name. That was his curse. He carried the weight of every fallen bannerman, every dead scout, every broken promise. Inside the main tent, the mood was tense. Roose Bolton stood near the center, arms folded. Lord Rickard Carstark was silent but clearly impatient. Edmure Tully looked between the men, like a man stuck between two fires. And beside Robb, always silent and shadowed, stood Grey Wind, his direwolf watching with yellow eyes that mirrored a storm barely held back. "They're bleeding us, Your Grace," Roose said calmly, pointing at the map. "Bit by bit, every day we sit here we grow weaker. The Lannisters are regrouping in the west. We've no word from the Eyrie, no ravens from Dorne. You must consider retreat." "I won't retreat," Robb said sharply. "Not after all we've sacrificed." "You sacrificed the Frey girl," Rickard muttered bitterly. "Now we're left without the bridge, without the support, and my sons rot in Lannister chains." Robb's jaw clenched. He didn't rise to the bait, but the silence in the tent grew heavier. "I've sent ravens," he said, "to Sunspear. Prince Doran is cautious but not blind. The Martells hate the Lannisters. They want vengeance for Elia. If they ride, we can strike King's Landing from both sides." Rose arched a brow. "And what if they never received your raven?" "They will," Robb said, though even he wasn't sure anymore. "It was sent through trusted hands." Rose exchanged a knowing look with Lord Carstark. "Trusted hands don't always mean safe ones." That night, as the camp settled under freezing skies, Roose Bolton wrote a letter of his own, but not to Dorne, and not to the north. His quill scratched softly against the parchment, each word a quiet betrayal. "To his grace, King Joffrey Baratheon," it began. He sealed it with the flayed man of House Bolton, and handed it to a courier who didn't wear northern colors. The man vanished into the woods before moonlight touched the treetops. Roose wasn't loyal to anyone but himself, and he had seen what came of loyalty: heads on spikes, sons burnt alive, alliances broken by love and pride. If Robb Stark fell, the Bolton name might rise. Meanwhile, in the deserts of Dorne, the sun blazed over Sunspear. Prince Doran Martell sat in his chair, his joints aching with every movement. He stared at the open balcony where his children once played. His face was calm, but his heart was burning, as it had been ever since his sister Elia died screaming in King's Landing. No raven had come, no call for alliance, no plea for vengeance, and that disturbed him. He sat in council with his brother Oberyn, the Red Viper, who paced restlessly, a spear in his hand and fury in his eyes. "You know what they did to Elia," Oberyn said. "You sit here waiting while Lannisters rule, while our blood cries out from the grave." "I wait because I must," Doran said. "We should have ridden years ago." "And now Robb Stark calls himself king and doesn't even look south." Doran shook his head. "You think no raven was sent?" Oberyn narrowed his eyes. "You think it was intercepted?" "I think," Doran said slowly, "that we are being kept in the dark. On purpose." Back at River Run, Talisa stood on the castle walls, her hands wrapped around her belly. She felt the child inside her stir, and her heart ached. She had married a king, but she saw the boy behind the crown, tired, angry, desperate. "You should speak to him," said Catelyn Stark, approaching quietly. Her voice carried both strength and sorrow. "I try," Talisa said softly, "but he's slipping away. Every day he gets quieter. War turns sons into strangers," Catelyn said. "I've lost Ned. I won't lose Robb too." As the wind picked up, a lone raven landed on the stone edge of the battlement, but it carried no message. No scroll, no seal, just blood on its wings. And somewhere deep inside the halls of River Run, a raven master searched for a bird that never returned. 2 days had passed since the raven with bloody wings appeared on River Run's walls, and though it had no scroll, it carried something worse, a bad omen. Old Nan used to say birds without words flew from death. Catelyn remembered that. Robb, however, refused to give in to superstition. He stood again in the war tent, listening to a scout kneel and give his report. "A Lannister host moves west from Harrenhal, Your Grace," the scout said, eyes low. "Led by Sir Adam Marbrand. 600 strong." They've burned 3 villages already, Edmure cursed under his breath. They're testing us. They know we're weakened, Robb muttered. And they know we're waiting for something. What do we do? Edmure asked. Robb looked at the map and ran his finger along the riverland's edge. We march east. Cut them off before they reach Seaguard.
I'll lead half the army.
Edmure, you hold River Run. Catelyn entered just as the council began to disband. Her presence always brought the scent of old grief and quiet judgment. She waited until they were alone before speaking. Don't go. I must, Robb said. I can't sit idle while they burn the river to ash. You're not just a commander now. You're a king, and a father soon, she added, glancing toward the tent flap where Talisa had passed minutes ago. Robb's face tightened. If I don't fight, none of that will matter. Catelyn stepped closer. Then let someone else ride. You sent a raven to Dorne. Wait for their answer. Don't bleed more men while you wait. I've waited long enough, Robb said, more sharply than he meant. He turned away. If Dorne was going to answer, they would have by now. He didn't know, of course, how close the raven came. How it had been taken in the wild woods of the Stormlands by a faceless figure cloaked in red. How the message now sat in a cold chamber beneath the Red Keep, where Tywin Lannister read it again each night before burning another northern village. In Sunspear, Prince Doran sat in quiet rage. He had sent riders north, not ravens, not letters, but men on horseback, to learn the truth. I want to know if Robb Stark ever reached for our hand, he said to Areo Hotar, his silent and deadly captain. And if he did, Areo asked, then someone wants war to stay in the north. Someone fears what Dorne could do. Oberyn Martell had already begun preparing to leave. He would go to King's Landing soon, not for peace but vengeance. But now Doran considered sending him north instead, to find the wolf and offer him the sun. If Robb Stark lives, Doran said, he should not fight alone. Far from both Sunspear and River Run, in the Whispering Woods near Harrenhal, a man in black armor with a red flayed man on his chest sat by a low fire. Look, Rose Bolton's cruelest man turned a charred leg of rabbit over the flames. Near him, 2 of his scouts laughed about northern banners burning in a nearby village. You really think Rose'll turn on the boy? One asked. Locker grinned, his teeth yellow and sharp. He already has. Fraser ready. Just waiting for the right wedding, the other laughed. Poor wolf pup's gonna drown in red. And he'll never know it was us, Locke said. Not until it's too late. Talisa had begun writing letters. Not for the war, not to rulers, but to her family in Volantis. She wanted them to know the child she carried would be born into war, but not into shame. She still believed in Robb. She had seen his heart. But even she began to feel the cold growing in his eyes. Each night he returned later, speaking less, loving her more fiercely, almost desperately, as if trying to hold on to something already slipping away. He's breaking, she whispered one night to Catelyn. He's bending, Catelyn corrected, eyes distant. A Stark does not break. Talisa stared at the candle flame between them. He never talks about the raven, because he's afraid it never flew. That night, as Robb prepared his men to march east, Grey Wind growled without reason. The direwolf stood near the tent flap, fur bristling, teeth bared, staring into the darkness as if something unseen had passed through it. Easy, Robb said, placing a hand on his back. But Grey Wind wouldn't stop. His hackles remained raised, his growls low, deadly. And somewhere far off, in a Lannister camp lit by dying fires, a message was delivered to Lord Tywin. He marches east, the rider said. Tywin nodded slowly. Then we march north, the war shifts. The shadows deepen, and the silence from Dorne grows heavier. Rain poured down as Robb Stark's army moved east, their banners soaked, their boots caked in the thick mud of the riverlands. The sound of hooves splashing through the flooded roads and the low hum of soldiers singing old northern war songs filled the damp morning. Robb rode near the front, his face hardened beneath the hood of his cloak, Grey Wind trotting beside his horse with eerie silence. His army was tired, not broken but worn, like steel pushed too far through fire. These men had followed him through battle after battle, watched friends die, seen houses rise and fall. And now they followed again, though many did not know why. The march east had no clear victory, just another move in a game that was no longer theirs. Robb had stopped speaking of Dorne, not because he had given up hope, but because hope now felt like weakness. Every day that passed with no reply from Sunspear, he felt more isolated. His crown felt heavier. His father's name felt distant. And Talisa's soft voice, though comforting, only reminded him of everything he stood to lose. At a river crossing near the God's Eye, the army made camp. The rain had finally let up, and fires were lit in the shallow woods. Robb stood with Lord Umber and Lord Karstark, reviewing scout reports and enemy movement. The Lannister host was closer than expected. "They've split their forces," Umber said. "Marbrand leads the vanguard, but I'd wager Tywin's not far behind." "Why split?" Karstark grumbled. "It's not like them." "To draw us out," Robb said quietly. "To tempt us into striking early." "And we will?" Karstark asked. Robb nodded. "We'll strike hard, then vanish into the woods. I want to bleed their vanguard. Show them the North still bites." Roose Bolton remained silent, watching from the edge of the tent, his eyes unreadable. He had received another letter earlier that day, one he didn't let Robb see. In River Run, Talisa woke from a dream of fire and blood. She sat up in bed, her hand on her belly, her skin slick with sweat. The child inside her kicked sharply, as if sensing her fear. Catelyn found her in the hall later that morning, standing at the window, watching birds fly over the Trident. "You should rest," Catelyn said gently. "I can't," Talisa whispered. "Something's wrong." "I can feel it." Catelyn stepped beside her. "He'll return." "He always does." Talisa didn't answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on the sky. "No ravens have come," she finally said. Catelyn looked at her sharply. "You've been watching?" "Every day," Talisa nodded. "I count them." Catelyn said nothing, but inside dread began to creep up her spine. She remembered what Maester Luwin used to say, "When the birds go silent, the gods are whispering." In Sunspear, Doran Martell received his rider, a dust-covered man who had ridden for 12 days straight. "No word," the rider said, panting. No reply. No mention of a raven from the north. Oberyn clenched his fists. Then someone stole the message. Doran closed his eyes. "It means they fear us. Enough to silence us. Then we ride?" Oberyn asked. "No," Doran said softly. "Not yet." Oberyn slammed his fist on the stone table. "You would still sit while the wolves die alone?" Doran looked at his brother. "I sit to watch who moves next." Far away, in the ruins near the Blackwater Rush, Sir Jaime Lannister stood with Sir Adam Marbrand, watching a burning farmhouse. "They know we're here," Jaime said, wiping mud from his gold armor. "They'll come," Adam replied. "He's too proud not to," Jaime sighed. "Pride gets men killed. Or worse, remembered as fools." He turned to the scout beside him. "Has the Raven reached Harrenhal?" "Yes, sir. Lord Tywin will meet us by the stone mill. He says the boy king marches into his own funeral." That night, Robb sat alone near the edge of the river. Grey wind curled at his feet. The stars were half hidden behind clouds, but he stared up anyway. He remembered a time when things were simpler, when he and Jon would lay in the grass at Winterfell, naming stars and daring each other to leap across the creek. He would have given his crown to return to that night. Just one. Talisa's letter lay in his hand. She had written him words of love, hope, strength, and warnings. She told him to listen to the silence, to feel what was missing. He had felt it every day, and yet he had no time to wait, or didn't pause for dreams. And ravens, even the lost ones, did not change fate. As Robb stood, grey wind rose and looked east. The direwolf growled again, low, warning, protective. Robb turned. From the shadows, a scout approached, panting, blood on his cloak. "They're coming!" the man gasped. "More than we thought. Tywin rides with them." Robb's expression did not change. "Then let them come," he said. But somewhere, deep inside him, he feared this battle wasn't meant to be won, that it was never a war of swords. It was a war of silence, and he was already losing. The dawn before battle always felt too quiet. Even the birds seemed to vanish, as if the trees themselves held their breath. Robb Stark stood in the early morning mist, watching as his men readied their armor. Grey wind stalked nearby, sniffing the air, restless and alert. The dire wolf sensed what the men dared not say. Something was wrong. Robb had split his forces into 3 units under his command, sending Lord Umber around the flank with 100 archers and placing Lord Karstark near the rear to cut off escape routes. The goal was simple: ambush the Lannister vanguard, bleed them fast, retreat into the woods before Tywin could reinforce them. But even as he gave the orders, doubt scratched at the back of his mind. There were too many pieces missing. The Lannisters were too bold, too prepared. It wasn't like them to risk a vanguard so deep in enemy territory, not without a plan behind it. And there was still nothing from Dorne, no word. No riders, no banners on the horizon, just silence. "You don't trust this, do you?" Edmure asked, riding up beside him. Robb kept his eyes on the fog beyond the tree line. "I trust my instincts. They're screaming at me." Edmure glanced toward the scouts returning down the muddy path. "Then we pull back." "No," Robb said flatly. "We hit them fast, hard. Then we vanish. If we run now, they'll know we're scared. We need to remind them who we are." Edmure nodded, though reluctantly. "Then may the old gods watch over us." Not far from the battlefield, Roose Bolton rode with a small company under a false banner. His face was calm, his cloak spotless, as if he were going to a feast and not war. "Do we join the charge?" one of his men asked. "No," Roose replied. "We observe." "Shouldn't we fight with the king?" Roose gave him a sharp glance. "The king fights for pride. I fight for survival." He had received a second letter from the twins the night before. Walder Frey's scribbled words had been clear. "It's ready. Just give the word." Roose would give no such word until he was sure the boy king would fall. And if Robb won today, well, there was always the wedding. The Lannister host moved in silence, red banners trailing behind golden lions. Tywin Lannister rode near the rear, his face cold, his eyes scanning the landscape like a hawk studying prey. Beside him rode Kevan and Sir Gregor Clegane, the Mountain, whose very presence made the ground seem to tremble. Tywin had read the Raven again that morning, the one stolen from the skies. Robb Stark's words to Dorne had been desperate, proud, and dangerous. If this had reached Doran Martell, Tywin thought grimly, we might have fought a war on 2 fronts. But it hadn't, because Tywin had seen to it. And now the boy would march to his end, not with a sword through his chest, but with silence wrapped around his neck like a noose. The ambush came just past midday. Robb's forces struck the Lannister vanguard at the edge of the forest, a blur of arrows, war cries, and northern steel. The first wave fell fast, men screaming as horses crashed into spiked traps. Lord Umber's archers rained fire from the hills, and grey wind tore through the enemy like a storm. For a moment, just a moment, it felt like victory. But then came the countercharge. From the left, Tywin's hidden riders crashed through the woods. From the rear, another force, unseen by Robb's scouts, struck like lightning. "They were waiting," Robb gasped, sword in hand, blood on his cheek. "They knew." Edmure fought beside him, fending off a Lannister knight. "We've been flanked!" "We retreat!" Robb shouted. "Sound the horns!" But the horns never blew. The horn-bearer lay dead in the mud, throat cut, face frozen in terror. Lord Karstark's men scattered. Umber's archers tried to regroup, but Lannister cavalry had already cut them off. It was a slaughter. Still Robb fought. He moved like his father, swift, sharp, unrelenting. Grey wind never left his side, cutting through red-cloaked men as if born for war. But no amount of strength could turn the tide. Roose Bolton watched from the hillside, untouched, unmoved. "Shall we join?" his man asked. Roose shook his head. "Let the wolves learn they are prey." By nightfall, Robb had lost nearly a quarter of his army. The survivors limped back to the edge of the forest, bloodied, silent, defeated. Edmure had taken a sword to the shoulder. Lord Karstark was missing. Grey Wind was wounded. Robb sat alone beneath a dead tree, the crown on his brow crooked, the look in his eyes hollow. "We were set up," he whispered. Catelyn's voice rang in his memory. "Don't bleed more men while you wait." But he hadn't waited. And Dorne had never come. Now he began to wonder if the Raven had ever reached them at all. He didn't know it yet, but the message had died not in fire, but in cold hands, murdered in silence, like the future of the North. The North bleeds. The boy king doubts, and behind smiles knives begin to sharpen. The camp after the battle was death itself. No music, no voices, no laughter, only the crackling of small fires and the groans of the dying. Robb walked through the field with his cloak draped over his armor, the scent of blood thick in his nose. The rain had returned, washing away some of the filth but not the guilt. He had lost over 2,000 men. Many were boys from small northern villages, sons of carpenters, farmers, shepherds. They had died for a king who had married for love and trusted a raven to change a war. Robb stopped beside the corpse of a young man no older than Bran. His eyes were wide open, sword still clutched in his fingers. There was no fear on his face, only confusion, like he died wondering why help never came. "Your Grace," Lord Umber said, approaching quietly, "we've gathered what's left of the company. Some wounded beyond healing. We're low on supplies. Too many horses dead. We can't take another fight like this." Robb didn't respond at first. He just stared at the boy. "Where is Rose?" he finally asked. Umber shifted. "He left before the charge ended. Took half his men west. Said he'd cut off the Lannister retreat." "Did he?" "No one saw him again." Robb's jaw tightened. "Of course they didn't." That night Robb sat in his tent with the map spread before him, but he didn't study it. He stared through it, like the parchment had betrayed him too. Talisa's letter lay beside his sword. Her handwriting was clean, careful. She had written of hope, but hope felt like a lie now. Edmure entered with a limp and a grimace. "They're saying this was a trap," he said. "A full Lannister trap." "It was," Robb muttered. "They're also saying someone gave them our movements." Robb looked up sharply. "Who?" Edmure hesitated. "Some say Karstark. Others say Roose." "Karstark was still fighting when the lines broke," Robb said. "Rose—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Far away in the Twins, Lord Walder Frey dipped his quill into ink and scribbled a new note. "The wolf limps. The trap closed. All that remains is the feast." He folded it and handed it to a cloaked rider. "No delays," he said. "Let Lord Tywin know the wine will flow." Beside him, his daughter Roslyn sat in silence. She had heard rumors of what the marriage would really be, but she said nothing. In the Frey halls, silence was the only safety. In King's Landing, Tywin Lannister read Walder's message without emotion. Varys watched quietly from the corner. "So the boy lives, but his army bleeds," Tywin said. "Yes," Varys murmured. "For now." Tywin set the parchment aside. "He's still a king in name, but names don't win wars. Allies do." "And enemies," Varys added softly. Tywin nodded. "The North no longer trusts him. The South will never know him. And Dorne," he smiled coldly. "Dorne remains in the dark," Varys hesitated. "But if they find out about the Raven—" "They won't," Tywin said. "Because we never gave them a reason to look." In Riverrun, Talisa stood at the castle gates watching the horizon for riders. She wore a heavy cloak, her belly now round with child. Catelyn joined her, a letter in her hand. "Another from the twins," Catelyn said bitterly. "Lord Walder invites us to the wedding. Edmure and Roslyn." Talisa looked at her. "You think it's real?" "It's real," Catelyn said, "but I don't trust it. Will Robb go?" "He needs to. We need Frey support again. And we have little choice," Talisa sighed. "Then we go too?" Catelyn looked into her eyes. "Yes, all of us." Neither woman said it aloud, but both felt the same thing, a knot of dread tightening with every passing day. In Sunspear, Doran Martell stood on the balcony of his tower, holding a scroll from his rider. No word, the scroll read. No raven, no message, nothing from the north. He turned to Oberyn. "They've been silenced." Oberyn's eyes flared. "By whom?" "Lannisters. Or someone who fears them. And you still sit here?" Oberyn snapped. "While wolves are hunted?" Doran's voice was low, steady. "A sun waits behind the clouds, brother. Let the clouds burn away first." Oberyn clenched his fists. "Then let them burn." Back in Robb's tent, Grey Wind growled again, not at anything outside, but at the silence itself. He paced, uneasy, snapping at the tent flap as if expecting something to crawl through it. Robb didn't sleep that night. He sat, blade across his knees, staring at the flames. He thought of Theon, of Bran and Rickon, of Jon at the wall, of his father's last letter, He had led men to die for a cause, but the cause no longer had a clear path. The wolf had teeth, but no allies, no bridges, no ravens, and soon no escape. The road to the twins was long, cold, and full of unspoken fear. Robb Stark rode ahead with his bannerman, Talisa by his side, wrapped tightly in a fur cloak that barely protected her from the chill. Behind them marched what remained of the northern host, scarred, tired men, their eyes empty from losses they never expected to suffer. Every footstep toward House Frey felt heavier than steel, but they had no choice. Robb had broken his vow. He had promised to marry one of Walder Frey's daughters, and failed. Now Edmure Tully would marry in his place, to make peace, to rebuild what had been shattered, to convince Frey to open his bridge and his house to them once more. "He'll forgive, won't he?" Talisa asked quietly. Robb didn't answer at first. He looked ahead at the grey mist rising above the river and the stone towers of the twins beginning to appear in the distance. "Forgiveness isn't in Frey's nature," he said. "But he might accept an apology if it benefits him. You don't trust him. I don't trust anyone who smiles too quickly." Talisa smiled faintly. "Then you shouldn't trust me either." He turned to her, and for a moment the war fell away. He kissed her forehead, resting his hand on her belly. "There, child. A reason to keep going. A reason not to lose. I trust you more than anyone in this world," he said. But even as he said it, grey wind growled softly behind them, as if the wolf knew that trust would cost them everything. At the twins, preparations had begun. Lord Walder Frey stood in the main hall, barking orders, sneering at servants, his sharp eyes watching every movement with distaste. "Clean the floors better," he snapped. "I want to see my ugly face in the wood." Rosalind Frey, the bride-to-be, stood quietly by the pillars, dressed in pale grey, her face like stone. She did not cry. She did not smile. Her father had warned her, this wedding isn't for love. It's for loyalty. And if they betray it again, they'll bleed for it. Roose Bolton arrived first. He brought no banners, no song, only quiet words and a cold look. "You're sure the Lannisters sent their word?" he asked Lord Frey. Walder nodded. "Gold has already reached our coffers, and the king's men wait at Harrenhal if things go south. But they won't." Rose straightened his doublet. "Just be sure it's clean." "I don't like messy affairs," Lord Walder cackled. "This won't be messy. It'll be a song. The loudest one they ever hear." That night, Robb's army arrived at the twins. The gates opened slowly, like a beast hesitating to welcome its prey. Banners of House Frey flapped lazily in the wind. No joy greeted them, no cheer. Just pale faces and eyes that watched too closely. Still Robb smiled. He had to. He dismounted and bowed before Lord Walder, who stood at the top of the steps with a twisted grin. "My lord," Robb said, "I come to make amends." Walder tilted his head. "Oh, I'm sure you do. After insulting my house, breaking your oath, and bedding a foreign woman in my place. But let's not dwell. Come, let's get you drunk enough to forget all that." Edmure approached next, nervous, pale, and already regretting everything. Walder looked him up and down. "Not the best looking, are you? But you've got all your teeth." "She'll take that." Rosalind didn't look up. Inside the great hall, the feast began. Music played. Food was served. Wine flowed more than water. The northern men slowly relaxed, too slowly for some. Talisa sat near Robb, smiling politely as the Frey women brought platters of venison and roasted onions. Catelyn sat at the high table, eyes flicking around the room like a hawk. She didn't drink. She didn't smile. And she didn't miss the way Roose Bolton sat alone, stiff, quiet, his chainmail glinting slightly beneath his sleeves. She leaned toward Robb. "Why is Rose wearing armor?" Robb frowned. "What?" But before he could speak again, Lord Walder stood and banged his goblet with a spoon. "My lords," he called out, "my ladies, we are gathered here for joy, for union, for celebration. And I must say, your grace, your apology has warmed this old heart." He raised his cup. "To House Stark. May they prosper and grow." Catelyn's eyes narrowed. Roose Bolton met her gaze, and he didn't blink. She reached under the table, her hand brushing the hilt of a dagger. Outside the hall, grey wind barked, once loud and violent. But no one heard it over the music. The music plays, the wine flows, but every step, every smile leads to one moment that will be remembered in silence and blood. Catelyn Stark could feel it in her bones. It was a feeling no mother could ignore, that sickening stillness before something awful. She sat frozen, her fingers wrapped tightly around her cup, eyes watching Roose Bolton, who had yet to drink, yet to smile, yet to blink. The Freys laughed too loudly. The guards were too still. Even the music felt off. And Grey Wind, the direwolf, had never acted this way. Locked outside the gates, pacing in circles, howling into the night. It wasn't just restlessness. It was warning. But no one listened. "Lady Stark," Rose said softly across the table. "You seem uneasy." She didn't answer him. Her eyes moved toward the doors. The guards there weren't Frey household men. They were strangers. Heavier armor, crossbows slung at the ready, positioned like they weren't protecting anything, but waiting. The music shifted. It had been a soft, light song played on pipes and flutes, one for dancing and drinking. But now it slowed deeper, darker. A drum joined in, then another. Then the Rains of Castamere began. Catelyn stood. Across the room, Robb laughed quietly with Talisa. She leaned against him, her hand on her belly. The sound of their joy was a knife to Catelyn's heart. She took a step toward Roose Bolton. "What is this?" she asked quietly. Roose looked at her, expressionless. The North remembers. It was a lie, and he knew it. Catelyn pulled back his sleeve. Chainmail. He didn't stop her. That was the signal. The music stopped, and the screaming began. Crossbows fired from the balconies. Arrows slammed into northern bannermen at the feast tables. Men who had just been raising cups now collapsed with bolts in their throats, their backs, their eyes. Panic erupted, but the hall was sealed. The doors slammed shut, barred from the outside. Frey men pulled knives from their sleeves and fell upon their guests with no hesitation. Robb turned just in time to see Talisa jolt forward, blood soaking through her dress. She gasped. He caught her before she fell, cradling her body as she looked up at him, hand trembling against her belly. "Our child," she whispered. Her eyes went glassy before he could answer. Robb didn't scream. He just held her unmoving as the room turned red around him. Catelyn fought through the chaos, grabbing a dagger from a fallen guard. She reached Robb, pulling him to his feet as more crossbow bolts flew. His tunic was soaked with Talisa's blood. His crown had fallen. Grey Wind howled wildly from outside the gates, slamming against the barred doors, but no one opened them. "We have to run," she hissed. "Robb, move!" But he didn't move. He looked down at Talisa again, lost. "Robb!" A Frey swordsman lunged, and Robb barely raised his sword in time to block. He fought like a ghost, not with fury, but with despair. His strikes were slow, broken, full of pain. Edmure was gone. Lord Umber dead. The northern lords were being butchered. This wasn't a battle. It was a message. Catelyn grabbed one of Lord Frey's young wives, pulling a blade to her throat. "Enough!" she screamed. The music stopped again. Blood dripped from the high table. Walder Frey stood calmly, drinking wine as if none of it touched him. "Let him go!" Catelyn cried, voice trembling. "Let my son go and I'll let her live." Lord Walder tilted his head. "I've got plenty of daughters," he said. And Roose Bolton stepped behind Robb. He leaned close, his voice a whisper in the chaos. "The Lannisters send their regards." The blade plunged into Robb's chest. Not once, but twice. Robb staggered, looked at his mother, looked down at his own hands, covered in his wife's blood and now his own. He said nothing. He collapsed beside Talisa. Catelyn let out a sound that didn't even sound human. She slit the girl's throat, one final cry of vengeance, before another Frey blade cut her down. She fell like a tree in the snow. And silence returned. Not peace, not mercy, just silence. Outside the twins, Grey Wind snarled and thrashed in the dark pen where he had been locked. Arrows rained down from above, 5, 6, 7. The direwolf went down with a final haunting cry that echoed into the trees. The North had no king now, no future. No raven ever reached Dorne, no warning ever left the twins, just silence, and the memory of Red. Sunspear was quiet when the news finally arrived. The courtyards were still, the fountains flowed gently, and the salt wind carried the scent of oranges. But within the palace, a shadow passed. Prince Doran Martell sat in his carved chair beneath a wide window, a scroll in his hand. The rider who brought it had delivered no words, just the parchment sealed in black wax. He broke it, read slowly, and didn't speak for a long time. Then he stood. His knees ached, his joints stiff from years of illness and age. But he stood tall. "Robb Stark is dead," he said. Oberyn, leaning against a pillar, narrowed his eyes. How? Slaughtered. At the twins, his wife, his mother, his men. All of them. Oberyn pushed off the wall, anger flickering across his face like wildfire. "And we heard nothing," he said bitterly. No call for help. No warning. Not even a whisper until it was too late. Doran sat again, folding the scroll. "He sent a raven." Oberyn's face darkened. "And? It never reached us." That silence was louder than any scream. In the streets of Sunspear, word spread like wildfire. Merchants whispered it to travelers. Servants murmured it behind palace doors. The north had fallen. The boy king was gone. And still, no banners had ever flown from Winterfell to Dorne. The Martells had stayed quiet for years, patient, calculating. But this silence, this betrayal of alliance before it even began, it tasted like poison. In the water gardens, Ilaria Sand sat with her daughters. When Oberyn arrived, he knelt before her and whispered the news. Her face grew pale, then hard. One of her daughters asked, "Will we fight now?" And Oberyn answered, "We should have fought long ago." In King's Landing, Varys stood beside the Iron Throne, watching as Tyrion Lannister read the report from the twins. "So it's done," Tyrion muttered. "Robb Stark, Talisa Catelyn, all gone." Varys nodded. A wedding turned into a slaughter. Tyrion's fingers tightened around the parchment. "Is this how we win wars now? By butchering guests under the guise of peace?" "It's how Tywin wins wars," Varys said carefully. "And Dorne?" Tyrion asked. "No reaction yet," Varys replied. "But they will. The Martells are not deaf or blind." Tyrion drank deeply from his goblet.
They'll come.
"Maybe not today, but vengeance rides slow in the south and always arrives when you least expect it." Back in Sunspear, Doran called his council. He held up a blood-stained feather, the last remnant of Robb's raven, delivered to them days after the twins burned. A smuggler had found it in a Lannister camp near the Stormlands, traded it for gold. There was no doubt. The raven had been intercepted, the message murdered before it ever reached their skies. "We could have saved him," Oberyn said through clenched teeth. "If we had known, we weren't meant to know," Doran replied. "So we sit again." Oberyn spat. "Wait again. Hide again?" Doran's eyes met his brother's. This time there was fire in them. "No," the room went still. "Send riders to every corner of Dorne," Doran ordered. "Gather our strength. No more ravens, no more letters. The time for silence has ended." Oberyn grinned for the first time in weeks. "And if the Lannisters ask why we rise, tell them," Doran said, "because they slaughtered a king who asked for our hand, and then buried the question in blood." Far to the north, the ruins of the Red Wedding still smouldered in rumor. Northern survivors whispered Robb's name in the woods. Old women wept for Catelyn Stark, who once walked among them with pride. Talisa's family in Volantis wore black. But none of them knew what Doran Martell now knew. That a chance to save the North had been stolen not by war, but by silence. By a raven that had been clipped mid-flight. And now dawn stirred. The sun was rising. And this time it would not wait. Vengeance awakens in the south. And in the shadows of betrayal, whispers of rebellion begin to take root. The banners of House Martell had not left Sunspear in nearly 2 decades. Not since the death of Elia, not since Robert's rebellion. But now, for the first time in years, horses were saddled under the rising sun, and Dorne prepared to march, not for politics, not for promises, but for blood. Oberyn Martell stood atop a dune outside the city, watching soldiers gather at the edge of the burning sands. He wore crimson and gold, the sun spear across his back. His daughters, the sand snakes, stood behind him armed and silent. There was no need for speeches. They all knew what this was. "This isn't for Robb Stark," Oberyn said aloud, though no one had asked. It's for the message they tried to bury, for the voice they silenced, for the trust they spat on. Ariohota approached, his axe glinting in the morning light. "Do we strike the capital?" "Not yet," Oberyn replied. "We don't strike cities. We strike men. We strike names. Lannister, Frey, Bolton, one by one. In the Riverlands the twins stood cold and proud, but the air around them had changed. The celebration had long ended, but the stench of death remained. Walder Frey feasted alone at the high table, gnawing on chicken bones, while his sons argued over lands and rewards. "They fear us now," he said, mouth full. "They'll remember who gave them the Red Wedding." But he didn't see the quiet whispers creeping through the Riverlands like smoke. The small folk spoke of Frey treachery, of sacred guest rites broken, of mothers slaughtered and unborn children stabbed beneath banners of peace. And further east, in the Vale, a raven arrived with black news. Lady Lysa Arryn read the scroll, her face pale. "They've killed the Starks," she whispered. Her maester nodded. She looked toward her son, still clinging to her skirts. "We must choose sides," she muttered, "before the sun burns through the clouds." Back in King's Landing, Tywin Lannister sat with Grand Maester Pycelle and Lord Varys in the Red Keep's council chamber. He tapped his fingers slowly against the table as Pycelle read aloud the first troubling report. "A Dornish patrol intercepted one of our trade caravans near the Boneway. Burned the supplies, killed the escort." "Bandits," Pycelle mumbled. "No," Varys said. "Martells." Tywin didn't flinch. "What was the cargo?" "Wheat, wine, and one sealed chest marked with a lion." Varys tilted his head. "They knew what they were doing." Tywin stood slowly, smoothing the folds of his crimson robe. "If Dorne thinks it can raise banners without consequence—" "They don't fear consequences," Varys interrupted. "Not anymore, because they now know you murdered their alliance before it began." Tywin turned. "I murdered no one. War has casualties. You didn't kill Robb Stark," Varys said softly. "But you killed the future he tried to build. And Dorne remembers." In Volantis words spread slowly but surely. Talisa's mother wept in the temple of the many-faced god. She had dreamed of her daughter returning as a queen. Now she had only ashes. And in the free cities, whispers of Westerosi chaos began to stir the old houses. The north had no king. The south burned. The Iron Throne rested on silence and betrayal. And across the narrow sea, a young queen with silver hair received a letter from an old ally in Dorne. "They killed a wolf," it read, "and silenced the sun. What will you do, dragon?" Back in Dorne, Doran Martell met with his captains under the hot desert sky. The scroll with Robb Stark's message lay open on the table. Its ink faded, its words still powerful. "I offer alliance. I offer justice. I offer marriage. Together we break the lion," a message the world was never meant to read. Doran looked at the commanders, his voice quiet but iron. "Tell every bannerman, we do not ride for Robb Stark. We ride for what was stolen from us, again." "And if the realm calls us traitors?" asked a captain. Doran smiled. "Then let them remember who they betrayed first." The sun rose over Dorne that morning without a cloud in sight. And for the first time in years it marched north, not as a raven, but as fire. Snow fell lightly over the broken stones of Riverrun. The banners of House Stark had long since been lowered. Only tattered remnants clung to the walls, black and grey, soaked in sorrow. The river still flowed beneath the castle bridge, but now it carried whispers instead of strength. Robb was gone. His body never returned. Talisa's remains had been burned in silence. Her child, never born, was buried in name only. And Catelyn had vanished. Some swore they saw her body pulled from the water days after the Red Wedding, pale and lifeless, her throat torn open like a cruel joke. Others claimed she never died, that the gods had brought her back, cold and vengeful. But the North had no room for legends, only loss. The Stark bannermen had scattered. Some returned to their keeps. Others vanished into the woods. A few stayed behind, too broken to run, too proud to kneel. Among them was Mage Mormont, face hardened, voice quiet as steel. "Dead but not forgotten," she told the remaining men. "Let the South think they've won. Let the Lannisters drink their stolen wine." Winter doesn't roar, it creeps, and it always comes. Beyond the neck, deep in the frosted woods of the north, ravens flew again, not from castles, from caves, from towers of stone hidden beneath snow. Men without names moved silently through the trees, gathering weapons, sharing food, whispering oaths. One of them lit a torch and held it before an old carving of a direwolf on a stone wall. Another whispered beneath his breath, "For the king who never bent." In the Dreadfort, Rose Bolton stood at his solar window, watching the grey skies with quiet dread. He had been named Warden of the North by King Joffrey, given lands and gold and title, all of it bought with blood. And yet he slept poorly. Dreams haunted him. Grey winds howl, Catelyn's scream, Robb's silent, broken stare. "Your reward came," his steward said, handing him a sealed scroll from King's Landing. Rose took it, broke the seal, read, then smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Far south, Dorne had begun to move, quietly, steadily. Caravans disguised as merchants slipped through the Red Mountains. Ships left from secret coves near the Broken Arm, avoiding ports loyal to the crown. Dornish steel, spears wrapped in cloth, crossed the waters of the Blackwater Bay under false banners, every move hidden, every silence intentional. Inside Sunspear, Doran Martell sat with a map spread across his lap. Beside him, his daughter Arianne traced routes with her finger. "We can land near Blackmont," she said. "Then march under cover of night." "No," Doran replied. "We strike not first, but last." Arianne looked confused. "If we wait too long, we wait for the moment they feel safe," Doran said. "That's when we cut deepest." A message was handed to him then, a raven from the Stormlands. He read it, smiled. "They're watching the north," he said. "Let them. The fire will come from the south." Meanwhile, in the Vale, Peter Baelish sipped wine and watched the horizon from the Aeries' icy windows. He had seen the reports. He knew of Robb's fall, of Catelyn's death. He knew the Freys and Boltons would turn on each other eventually. They were built on fear, not loyalty. But now a rumor had reached him. From Braavos, from Volantis, even from the free cities. The Martells were stirring. Littlefinger smiled faintly. "Finally," he murmured. "Someone's moving the board. In King's Landing." Queen Cersei stared out over the city as the bells tolled in celebration of peace. The war was won, the Starks broken, and Joffrey sat smugly on the Iron Throne. But peace was only ever a delay. Master Qyburn entered her chambers, bowing low. "Another Dornish patrol attacked a Lannister supply train near Tumbleton," he said. "Bandits?" Cersei asked, annoyed. "No," Qyburn replied. "Martell colors. Not hidden anymore." Cersei turned slowly. "So they come," Qyburn smiled. "And not alone, Your Grace. We intercepted a message on a Volantene ship, a letter from Dorne to Daenerys Targaryen." For the first time in weeks, Cersei's eyes widened. "She's still alive?" "Alive," Qyburn said, "and listening." That night, as the wind howled through the trees beyond River Run, a cloaked figure approached the gates. A soldier raised his torch. "Who goes there?" The figure didn't speak, just held out a hand, pale, thin, trembling. A woman's hand, covered in dried blood. The soldier stepped back. "My lady." The figure removed her hood, hair tangled, eyes empty, throat scarred, but unmistakably Catelyn Stark, not dead, not broken, not silent, returned to remember, to punish, to finish what her son could not. The lion still rules, but ghosts are stirring and fire answers silence with fury. She was not the woman she once was. Catelyn Stark had always carried herself with grace, even under grief. She had wept for Ned, prayed for her children, stood beside Robb through war. But now she spoke no prayers. No tears came. Her voice had been stolen, her throat slit clean through. Yet death had not claimed her. They called her something else now. Lady Stoneheart, the Brotherhood without banners, found her near the river, breathless and still. They had buried others with less blood. But Thoros of Myr had looked into her face, laid hands upon her pale skin, and whispered to Rella. He didn't expect it to work, but she rose. Since then, she spoke rarely, her voice a rasping whisper, torn and wet like wind through a ruined hall. She didn't ask questions. She didn't grieve. She judged, and she hanged Freys by the dozen. They screamed the name King Joffrey, Lord Walder, Rose Bolton, but no name brought mercy. She didn't deal in mercy anymore, only justice. Back in Sunspear, Doran Martell held court with emissaries from the free cities. Their robes were fine, their words wrapped in silk. But Doran could see the truth beneath every polite smile. The world was watching Westeros burn. One of the emissaries, a merchant lord from Lys, leaned forward. "You don't want war, Prince Doran. Dorne has peace, sun, power in its borders. Why bleed for northern ghosts?" Doran didn't answer him directly. Instead, he opened a small chest beside his chair and removed the torn, stained parchment. The same letter Robb Stark had written, the one intercepted and discarded. He slid it across the table. The Lysini read it, lips tightening. "So, he reached for you," the man muttered. "And they cut off his hand before it ever touched ours," Doran said. "Now they think that silence will keep us in place." He stood slowly, painfully. "Let them learn," he said, voice quiet but full of fire, "that Dorne may be last to speak, but never first to forget. In Meereen, Daenerys Targaryen sat upon a marble throne of broken chains, reading the letter herself. It had been brought by a sand snake, Nymeria, fierce, clever, deadly. Daenerys held the parchment like it was something sacred. "The North wanted alliance," she whispered, "and the realm killed it. The realm fears your return," Nymeria said. "Dorne does not. Why now?" Daenerys asked. "Why offer me your hand now after so long?" "Because they murdered a boy who could have been a king," Nymeria said, and silenced his voice before the world could hear him. Daenerys looked out across the sea. "My dragons grow restless," she said, "and I have waited long enough." In King's Landing, the small council grew tense. Reports of Dornish movements were arriving daily. Trade disruptions, ships refusing to dock, spies going silent. Tywin Lannister held one letter in hand. It was unsigned, unsealed, but clear. "We did not forget Elia, we will not forget Robb, and we will not forgive you." He passed it to Cersei. She read it and threw it into the fire. "They want war," she spat. "Then let it come." "War's already here," Varys murmured. "It just hasn't reached your gates yet." Beyond the wall, Jon Snow stood atop the battlements of Castle Black. He hadn't known Robb had sent a raven to Dorne. No one had. But when the rumors came, whispered by wildlings, traders, broken men fleeing south, Jon felt something crack in his chest. His brother had tried to change everything, and the world never even gave him a chance. Sam brought him the news late one evening. "They say the Martells are moving, and the free cities are watching, and Daenerys Targaryen received the Stark letter." Jon stared out into the snow. "All that effort," he muttered, "and the raven never even reached its wings." Sam looked down. "Maybe it reached something else." Jon nodded slowly. "A fire." Atop Dragonstone, Melisandre stood on the cliffs, arms raised to the storm. Her flames whispered secrets too vast for common tongues. But one truth was clear. "The silence has ended," she murmured. "The North remembers, the South burns, and the dragon begins to fly." She turned to the shadow behind her. "He must rise," she said, "or all will fall." The shadow didn't speak, but in its hands it held a sword, one that burned. The Iron Throne felt colder than usual. Cersei Lannister sat beside her son, King Joffrey, as a bard played soft music near the steps. The throne room was filled with courtiers and flatterers, but no one truly smiled. They had all heard the rumors, that Dorne was arming, that ships from Volantis now flew Martell colors, and that the Dragon Queen had sent her riders east with new banners. No one spoke of it openly, but dread clung to the court like a bad smell. "They won't dare march on us," Joffrey said confidently, voice petulant and bored. "The North is shattered. The wolves are dead. What's left to fear?" Cersei tried to smile, but her fingers dug into the armrest. "You think that makes us safe?" she asked. "You think ghosts don't bite?" Joffrey snorted. "They can try. I'll have their heads. I'll burn Dorne to ash." Tywin Lannister entered the hall then, and silence followed him like a trailing cloak. He handed Cersei another scroll. "Another Frey convoy ambushed in the Riverlands," he said. "Bodies hanged. tongues removed. When carved with words into his chest, Cersei opened the scroll. Carved into flesh were 4 words: the North remembers. Frey forgets. In the Riverlands, Lady Stoneheart's justice became legend. She moved like a shadow across the night. Every Frey patrol was hunted. Every Bolton man who rode south vanished in the mist. Her followers grew, not just Brotherhood rebels, but broken northern men who had lost everything at the Twins. They followed her like a goddess, not because she spoke, but because she acted. They began calling her something else: the Weeping Widow, the Dead Queen, Mother Vengeance. Each one wrong and yet true. Gendry, the blacksmith bastard of King Robert, now rode with her. He watched her in silence, afraid to speak but too loyal to run. He had once forged swords for kings. Now he carried out justice in the name of a king who had never worn his crown long enough. "She kills them all," he whispered once, "and she doesn't blink." South of the Reach, Oberyn Martell led a silent force through hidden mountain passes. He wore no armor, only light leathers, his spear strapped to his back like a second limb. His daughters followed close behind, each one deadlier than the last. Their destination was not King's Landing. It was Harrenhal. The monstrous burned fortress now served as a garrison for Lannister men. But they were lazy, fat from Frey feasts and drunk on victory. They didn't see the sun coming. Oberyn struck at night. When the battle was over, Harrenhal's walls bled. Dornish banners flew for the first time in 100 years. No quarter was given, only fire. And on the gates, they nailed the body of the garrison captain with a note pinned to his chest. This was for Elijah, the next is for Robb. On the narrow sea, Daenerys Targaryen stood at the bow of her flagship, the Silverwind, watching the horizon. Her dragons circled above like living storms, wings stretching across the sky. Behind her sailed 10 ships, gifts from Dorne. In her hand she still held the copy of Robb Stark's letter. The paper was torn now, weathered by wind and sea, but she refused to let it go. Tyrion stood beside her, eyes narrowed. "You're not sailing for revenge," he said. "I'm not," she replied. "I'm sailing for what they tried to bury. A king who asked for peace. A wolf who never got his howl." Tyrion smiled bitterly. "Then howl for him." "I will," Daenerys said, "with fire." In Winterfell, the snows had returned. The castle had been abandoned after Theon's madness, left cold and hollow. But now, fires were being lit in its great hall again. Footsteps echoed in its corridors. Banners were quietly sewn in the corners of ruined rooms. Northern men were coming home, and among them walked a boy with the eyes of a direwolf and the soul of a 3-eyed crow. Bran Stark had seen it all. He had seen his brother's death beneath that cursed roof, had watched the raven fall in flames, had followed the fire south and the ghosts rising in the dark. Now he returned home, not as a boy, but as something more, something the realm would soon remember. And in the dark corners of the world, ravens began to fly again, real ones. Messages from Dorne, from Meereen, from the Vale, from the Riverlands. Not all reached their mark, but enough did. And those that read them knew the silence was over. The game was breaking, and the dead were whispering back. The last ravens fly, the realm begins to burn, and the silence that killed a king meets its reckoning. The war began not with horns, but with shadows. From the Riverlands to the Stormlands, whispers replaced banners. Names vanished from ledgers. Minor lords disappeared in the night. Freys found dead with their eyes removed. Bolton men ambushed on roads they once called safe. They had silenced Robb Stark, but they could not silence the consequences. In Dorne, the Martell army stood beneath the blazing sun, now tens of thousands strong. Spearmen, archers, light cavalry. Prince Doran, frail but fierce in his seat, raised the sun and spear banner with his own hand. Beside him stood Oberyn, eyes on fire, and Arianne, armored in gold and crimson, her voice sharp as steel. "Ride," Doran said, "not to conquer, but to answer." Their banners crossed the Boneway and surged into the Stormlands. Every town that had praised the Red Wedding burned. Every house that had backed the Boltons taken. Every man who once boasted of silence. Found in the Vale, Petter Baelish held letters in both hands. One was from Sunspear, one from Meereen. Both offered the same thing: join us or be swept away. He laughed softly to himself. "I once said chaos is a ladder," he whispered. "But now I see silence is a grave." And for once he made the right choice. The Vale's banners rose, and they pointed south. In King's Landing, chaos took root. The streets were filled with tension. Soldiers looked over their shoulders. Nobles began packing their wealth, readying ships. Whispers of a fleet, led by Daenerys Targaryen herself, crept into the Red Keep. Tywin stood in the council chamber, fists clenched. "They were never supposed to unite," he growled. "They didn't," Varys replied. "You united them when you murdered peace." Joffrey screamed at his council. "Let them come! I'll cut their heads off and feed them to the dogs!" But even the dogs had begun to howl at night. Like something unseen was moving through the capital's shadows. The day after, 3 things happened. The Dornish fleet landed at Shipbreaker Bay. A raven arrived from the Vale announcing neutrality broken. And the skies darkened over the sea, filled with dragons. Daenerys rode Drogon high above the narrow sea, her eyes locked on the horizon. Ships followed beneath her. Banners of the dragon, of the sun spear, of broken chains. She didn't come for the throne. She came for the lie that killed Robb Stark. The realm had silenced a boy king before he could find peace. Now the Dragon Queen would bring them truth, in fire. In the Riverlands, Lady Stoneheart held court in an old sept turned to gallows. She gave no speeches, only nods, judgments, death. But when word came that Daenerys sailed and Dorne marched and the Vale rose, she looked to Gendry, and she spoke. Her voice torn, monstrous, trembling like dried leaves in winter. But she spoke. "The time is now." Then she took up her dagger and began the final hunt. She would not see a throne. She did not want one. She only wanted the men who stole her son's future to die, remembering why they did it. In Winterfell, Bran stood in the godswood beneath the heart tree, his eyes turned white, his soul flying with the ravens. He saw it all. The wedding, the betrayal, the raven that never arrived. The fire it started anyway. And then he saw his brother, young, proud, dead on a cold stone floor. But he also saw Daenerys riding through storm, and a blade of ice and fire waiting beneath ash. He opened his eyes. "They think this is about revenge," he said to Mira. She looked at him, frowning. "Isn't it?" "No," Bran whispered. "It's about balance." And when Daenerys finally reached the gates of King's Landing, the bells did not ring. There were no speeches, no negotiations, only silence. The same silence that once swallowed a raven. And in that silence, Drogon opened his mouth, and fire answered. The Lannisters watched their towered city become a second Harrenhal. Tywin died in the fire. Cersei fled. Joffrey screamed until his crown melted. And amid the ashes, the last words Robb Stark had written to Dorne were read aloud by Daenerys to the people of King's Landing. "I offer justice, alliance, and peace. Together we can break the lion's reign." The crowd was quiet, and then they began to cheer. Not for revenge, for truth. In the end, Robb Stark never wore the Iron Throne. He never heard Dorne's reply. He never saw his child born. He never knew the cost of his silence. But the world did. And long after the ashes settled, long after banners were changed and thrones reforged, children told the story of the king whose raven never reached its mark, and how that silence burned a kingdom.